Hello everyone, welcome back to Adventures Through the Mind. I'm your host, as always, James W. Jesso. This is a podcast that explores topics relevant and related to psychedelic culture, medicine, and research, and always with the underlying question of how we can work with and through our psychedelic experiences to become better people, not just for ourselves, but for our larger web of relationships in the direct lives of the people we care about right here, right now, extending out into the larger world and extending out into the people who have yet to walk this earth, but whom will be impacted by the way we lived in one way or another. So that's the premise of this show, and it's what guides my interviews with people ranging from scientists to therapists to philosophers, and even as for today, to artists. And although the content can be quite serious at times, not always, because psychedelics are not always super serious. Sometimes they're extremely playful. And this episode is also quite playful. It's quite fun. It's with Brian Blomerth, who is the author and cartoonist behind the book Mycelium Wassoni. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm holding up the book, and I'm just going to open a random page for you to get a sense of what this very beautiful, large comic book is all about, although I will speak to it more in a moment when I read the overture. But first, I'm going to announce that there is a contest going on, and I'll link to it in the wherever you're checking this out. But the contest is for this poster. Again, if you can see here on the video, it's this big, beautiful poster done by Brian Blomerth. More details again in the link. Frame not included. I lucked that frame out of a thrift store recently. Perfect size, perfect coloring too. Very lucky. But yes, so check out that poster contest. Not too much further ado on the beginning. Let's get into the overture for this episode with Brian Blomerth. Psychedelics and art. The history of both are inseparable from each other, wherein, to at least those of us raised in the Western world, the so-called psychedelic 60s and the incredible movements in music that came through LSD might be the first that comes to mind, such as Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles, Pink Floyd, and the now infamous LSD-infused Santana performance at Woodstock in 1969, which is easily one of my personally favorite, I think, best live performances I've ever seen on YouTube. Not in person. I was not alive. But beyond music, perhaps when considering psychedelics and art, you might think of the artwork of Peruvian artist and shaman Pablo Amaringo, who helped to reveal and characterize the religious iconography of the visionary experience of ayahuasca to the wider world. Or perhaps the art of Alex Grey, whose Sacred Mirrors and Transfiguration series help reflect and reveal the profound visual and ontological complexity of tryptamines to the experienced and unexperienced alike, launching a whole new era in art that many of us simply refer to as visionary art. Perhaps you might even draw to mind an association between psychedelic history and art all the way back to Paleolithic cave art supposedly emerging out of altered states of consciousness, plant-induced or otherwise. Essentially, psychedelic history and art are interwoven in incredible and wondrous ways, which is why there is something particularly special for me about other important events in psychedelic history being characterized in artistic form. And this brings us to today's interview with cartoonist Brian Blomerth, whose most recent work tells the story of Valentina and R. Gordon Wasson's love affair with mushrooms and how it led them to Mexico, Maria Sabina, and the magic mushroom. Brian Blomerth is an illustrator, cartoonist, and musician based in Brooklyn, New York, who has spent years combining classic underground art styles with his bitingly irreverent visual wit in zines, comics, and album covers. His previous foray into psychedelic history was through his 2019 full-length book Bicycle Day, quote, which is, quote, a historical account of the events of April 19th, 1943, when Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann ingested an experimental dose of a new compound known as lysergic acid diethylamide and embarked on the world's first acid trip, end quote. His most recent work is another full-length book, which we just mentioned, Mycelium Wassoni, quote, a visual biography of a tragic love story of the lives and trips of R. Gordon and Valentina Wasson, the pioneering scientist couple responsible for popularizing the use of psychedelic mushrooms in the United States, end quote. It is this book that he is on the show to talk about for this episode. Together, we talk about Brian's journey into drawing and comics, his artistic process, the intense journalistic research that went into both Mycelium Wassoni and Bicycle Day, the strange findings and complexity he uncovered during that research, and why making these cartoonist accounts of psychedelic history matter to him. So that's the overture. That can be found at jameswjesso.com if you want to read it, for the links or for the show notes of this episode 159. And that's the interview we're going to get into. Before we do, I want to give a big thanks to my patrons on Patreon who make this show possible and have especially made a kind of stability possible for me over the last short while as I've been recovering from a head injury and very slowly struggling my way back to being able to work without pain and other troubling and unfortunate symptoms. Any of you who have experienced concussion probably know what I mean. And if you haven't experienced concussion, highly encourage you to inform yourself about it, because somebody in your life probably has or probably will, and having that knowledge will likely be helpful in your relating with them and caring for them in that process. So thank you very much, patrons, and other people who have left donations to the show. It really means a lot. The people whose names are listed on the screen here have been giving significantly, some of which for a long time, so an extra thank you to them. Your names are also listed in the description to this episode. If you're not yet a patron and you'd like to become one, please head to patreon.com/JamesWJesso. PayPal donations are also possible. Links are in the description to this episode. So thank you so much for supporting the show financially. That is essentially all for the preamble, except for one point, which is this interview, although chaotic at times, auditorially and relationally in the dynamic, it's also very fun and playful. We even have an interruption, we'll say a cameo from Brian's Pomeranian at one point during the interview as well. So if you're watching that on video, have some fun. If you're watching it on audio, just do your best not to get distracted by all the things. But yeah, it was a really fun and playful interview experience that I really enjoyed having, and I hope you enjoy listening to. Without any further ado, here is my interview with Brian Blomerth on Adventures Through the Mind, episode 159. Enjoy. All right, Brian Blomerth, welcome to Adventures Through the Mind.
Thank you for having me. Pull this puppy up because he's just scratching at the thing.
All right, so we got...
This puppy will be quiet the whole time. This is Banana.
We got Brian and Banana on the call. So I recently read is an interesting way to put it, because there actually wasn't a whole lot of like text in it, but I recently read your new, I don't know, would you call it a comic or a graphic novel, given its size?
I mean, the term that I like is like experimental children's book. And I mean, it's not like, it's not going to be like tons and tons of text in this. Like, that's not really what I'm trying to do here, you know? Like, people are always like, I guess it's a book in terms of writing, but like, no. I mean, the idea is, you know, that it's the concepts, it's the ideas, and it's the story presented like as simply as possible, you know? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you know, and if people can take something from that, that's great, you know? But if it's not for everybody as well, I'm sure.
Okay, so it's a comic. I'll just call it a comic.
Hey, that works for me,
book.
Yeah.
A long comic book bordering on graphic novel, Mycelium Wassoni, which is a retelling of the story of R. Gordon Wasson and his wife, whose name is
Valentina.
Valentina, that's right. And their discovery of and popularizing of psilocybin mushrooms, and also their journey into mycology, which was a great read. You had incredible art style. Seeing Goofy up on the wall, I think, explains a couple of things about your selection of art style.
recently I did that when I was working on the book. I took a break for a day and like taught these kids like at this like children's like after school thing. It was like a drawing class for children that some friends of mine run, and they saw my drawings and like they were like, the teachers were like, "So do you have any takeaways?" And the kids were like, "I guess he likes Goofy a lot." So I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna put this up for my first podcast."
Well, the kids know. I didn't even catch it until I saw Goofy. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like dog people. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a tradition in comics actually, but it's such an old one that most people like don't know it anymore. Or like, if you ever read Carl Barks or Donald Duck, all the people that are around the Donald Duck universe are all dog people. Most people don't think about that or know that, but hey, that's the facts of it.
So you describe yourself as a cartoonist, is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. Or illustrator.
So what got you? Well, I'm going to ask you more about that, your particular new book and your sort of dive into sort of like illustrative cartoon representations of psychedelic history and the two books that you have on that a little bit later on. But I'm curious what it is that got you into cartooning and into making comics.
Well, when I was a kid, I went to the library all the time, and I figured out that there was like an adult in the adult like library section. I don't know, does Canada follow the Dewey Decimal System?
They did, but everything's digital now. Last I checked.
True.
Oh, it would be Dewey Decimal, yeah, because how you would find it on the shelf. But yes, so yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I figured out that there was like an adult comics section in the Dewey Decimal System, and they had this book, Blackbeard's Treasury of Newspaper Comics, and I checked that book out like every week. Like I would always go back and check it out, and then have it, and then recheck it out over and over again. And I would just draw from and copy from that book all the time. I like really loved that book. So I always liked older comics. I was always interested in them, and yeah, when I went to art school because I thought I could be like a painter kind of guy later in life, but then I just kind of realized none of that was for me, and I'd rather just draw. So yeah, I don't know, cartooning. It was always something I was really interested in, and I started taking it more seriously.
So your style, is it rooted in that sort of like old school comic? Oh, your mic is scratching up because of banana there.
Okay, you're going back down. Hopefully he isn't crazy. He's a young puppy, so he's insane.
He's also cute. I saw a picture of him in one of your promo shots, and I was like, oh, cute, a Pomeranian. So anyways, so is it that older comic book style that inspires your style now? One of the things when I first was reading your book and looking through, I noticed a lot of what in my mind had a lot of similarity to sort of the Robert Crumb style from like in the 60s?
Yeah, 60s, 70s. I mean, he's still working till today. Yeah, but yeah, for sure. I mean, older comics, 100%. And I mean, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely older comics.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I mean, and I take a lot from like the 60s underground people too, like Moscoso, Crumb, Shelton, all those people.
So from a content level, I mean, there's a lot of things comics can be drawn about, and having read Mycelium Wassoni and then having looked through some of the comics that you were doing for Vice for a little bit there, there's a theme, something like sex and drugs. I'm curious, what is it, that calls you to those themes, and why you feel like they are relevant to have comics written about?
See, I wouldn't say that sex is like really a big theme anymore, or really in the Vice comics, no either. But the Vice comics, I don't know if those are really, here's kind of the rub with it, is I'm not a very good writer as far as comics go. Like I try really hard, and for the Vice things, they basically just like threw me on a schedule where I had to do one every week, and I was just completely out of my mind. So shoot,
your dog is going crazy on that mic again.
Sorry, it's just chaos over here.
This is kind of a chaotic interview so far. Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Where was I? Yeah, I don't know. I just the drug thing. I just thought that, hey, if I got the opportunity to make a book, I wanted the book to be like a book that I was proud of, and like a concept that I was proud of, and like legalizing psychedelics for research purposes. That's like one of the few things I can say, hey, I actually am interested in that. So like the subtle goal of that is like hopefully these early like psychedelic like pioneers or you know hobbyists, if you will, or people that or professionals like Hoffman. I mean, that was kind of their goal, and if I could get some people interested in that that wouldn't be otherwise, particularly maybe like a younger crowd or people that aren't really thinking about it in this way, and that would be nice, and that'd be a worthy goal and a reason to make a book.
Hmm. Have psychedelics played, is this sort of just like a conceptual or sort of like a social political support, or have psychedelic drugs played a particular role in your creative process as an artist?
See, not really. Like I have obviously partaken a dash, but I wouldn't say they're like, I mean, I can't draw like stone out of my mind. Like that doesn't really work. Like drawing is more like an everyday practice that you really have to like focus in on, and you get more involved into it as you go. So yes and no. Like I'll remember like certain things that like happened during those kind of moments in my life, and that'll like inform some of the work inside of it. But yeah, I wouldn't say. Yeah, I don't know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So what drives your creative process then? I mean, you talked about sitting down every day. Like I feel that as a writer of literary art, right? I'll just say, I have to sit down and work every single day. And there's a lot of times where it just goes really poorly for one reason or another, or it feels like it goes really good. And then the next day I realize it went really poorly, but it adds to the larger system. But I have to show up and sort of like workhorse in some way, like mule the writing through if I'm ever to get it done. So like when you said like, yeah, you got to just show up every day and just draw if you want to get that from like a technical end. But is there something underneath in my mind, like the mechanical process of developing the technique that inspires the creative aspects of it, the ideas that come out and how you represent them?
In some ways, yes, but in other ways, it really is just like the grind is its own reward in some ways.
Mm.
Like to go back to Hoffman to something and to better articulate. I'm not doing a great job articulating so far. That's the way it goes sometimes. But to better articulate, like Hoffman in his book, he talked about having like a particular moment, like a visionary sort of moment in the woods when he was a child. And that like informed his like knowledge of the world, how he saw everything, and why he wanted to like pursue chemistry as a career, right? I know in my own life, I have had like moments similar that aren't psychedelic, but relate to the psychedelic experience in some ways. Like it's the same kind of like, it's just like an overwhelming passion that's undescribable. I mean, a lot of my work is undescribable, like even to me. I'm like, why did I make these choices? These dog people don't make any sense. The way I draw certain things, drawing over and over again obsessively, it seems very confusing to me. But there's got to be a purpose to it, a grander purpose to it, And that's kind of, I think that's why I show up, is it still feels interesting and fun for me to do.
So is there's some sort of sense that there's a grander purpose underneath what seems to just be chaos when it just kind of comes out chaos or unexplainable, and there's something about, even though you don't know what it is, that there's something about staying on track that makes you feel like you're a part of that larger creative process in yourself?
100%. I mean, as you can see, my life is chaos. This dog is going crazy. Everything is just completely falling apart constantly. I mean, the desk stays the same no matter what. I'm sure it's the same with writing. Like where you're working at, you set it up and you go there every day. And that's like a solace. I mean, because drawing is like, I don't even think I'm like a person when I'm drawing, kind of. It's just like I don't even exist for like 6 hours. I don't remember, I never dreamed about drawing. Like it's never like coming to my subconscious where I'm drawing. It's just not interesting enough to my brain to like file away. But like, I do have fun every time I do it and learn new things about myself and about the world. And it's nice to like, when you're walking around and looking at something, being like, you know what, maybe I'm going to add that in one day. I'm going to catalog that and add that in. Like a nice, fire hydrant or something. I mean, the world is beautiful and full of critters just smiling and waving at you. So, that's kind of something I try to get across in my books if I can.
So was there anything special? So you ended up feeling like, okay, I want to do something meaningful if I'm going to make like a book length production of some variety, and you lean towards your first one, Bicycle Day, which was about the discovery of LSD. I haven't read Bicycle Day. I'd love to. Now that I've read your Mycelium Wassoni, I'm excited to give it a go. So that sort of was like, yeah, okay, I want to do that because it feels meaningful. When you decided, okay, I'm gonna illustrate a sort of comic representation of an important historical event, was there something different that came through you in your creative process that is like notably different than when you're just kind of drawing whatever comes to mind?
Well, I tried to do as much research as possible. Now, this is where it gets funny, is most people will see this book and not think there's that much research involved, or the research involved was very like surface level. But in reality, I tried to read every single thing I could get my hands across by this couple, or by R. Gordon Wasson, or by the collaborators and such, that would fit into this thing. And you try to reference those, like, there's so many things that people wouldn't believe, or like reference points, or things they wouldn't believe actually happened in the book. Like, I don't know, that like the dig on Boston is real. Like, he really did say that his son was in a terrible place and then said it was Boston, like those kind of details actually happened. And so compared to other work, of course, you try to honor these people in the best way you can. I mean, obviously it's funny to like honor them by drawing them as dogs in my own goofy way. Yeah. Like, it's like a very personal spin on, what I believe to be like a classic tale. Like, both of these stories to me have like a similar arc to as like a Disney movie would have, like, so you just try to honor them in the thing, those are kind of the goals.
When you're, like, this is something I wouldn't know necessarily. But when you were doing, I guess I can speak mostly to the art for Mycelium Wassoni because I haven't read Bicycle Day yet. Did you try to incorporate, because your art style is very rich and it's very complex. Not necessarily complex when somebody would think psychedelic complex, they might think like Alex Gray or something like that. But complex in the sense that there is a lot going on that's coherent to look at, but there's like a lot of little things happening. Did you try to represent like nuances of the history in the small ways that you represented little things, like Easter eggs or anything like that? Like, did that come into how you sort of filled the space around the main imagery?
Well, there's an Easter egg on the back of the book for this very reason.
Oh.
Yeah, there is a lot of that, actually. There's a lot of that. Of course. I mean, that for mushrooms, that fits in. Mushrooms, let's say, so for Bicycle Day, I don't know, I guess you haven't seen it, but in Bicycle Day, we did all these things like this, where it's like fluorescence for like a lot of the trip sequences, and printing like that. But for this, I decided, if LSD is like this sort of like tonal characteristics, like in your face, also, neons, handmade. It's a man-made like quality of color.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't really exist in nature like this, So if this is the acid, mushrooms are, watercolors, and they're also like a secret language and all sorts of like little details like that, like mushrooms presenting themselves to you in a completely different way. At least I think so. And I think that kind of fits the mushroom narrative a bit more. So yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I hear what you're saying about there sort of being like a different sort of tone to the mushroom experience. And you had mentioned in the book that the secret language, the sort of like cryptic language of the mushroom, is an actual language. Did you actually devise alphabet? Like, is it decodable? Like, where can I find the key? Or do I have to figure it out on my own?
But the twist is, do you want to decode it? Because I also use this like Terrence McKenna quote about them being Borscht Belt comedians. That kind of informs what they say. So occasionally they say something that I think is nice, but sometimes it's not so nice. I mean, it's dirty. It's in the dirt. mushrooms work pretty blue, according to Terrence, and I agree with that.
Now, when you say that, have you had some particular mushroom experience? Like, these are sensitive topics. You don't have to reveal your own inner experience, but have you had mushroom experiences that you found confronted you with difficult or disturbing material that you still, in hindsight, still attributed to being a positive experience, or even didn't contribute to being a positive experience with mushrooms?
No, I mean, I would say that they were overwhelmingly pretty positive. I mean, the mushroom experience I had before I did this book was a bachelor party where we were kind of torturing the bachelor a bit, but about nice things like loving his wife and, having a child, probably, like things like that, like, you're just like, wow, this is heavy in the thing. And it was a little blue, but it was also like very funny and very like, it's just great to like wish a friend like, to experience something like that with like a group of friends, like that really, I mean, that isn't really like the classic mushroom tale, but it's a part of it. It's a part of the whole thing. And, they are funny.
Certainly
they
can
do
be.
fuck with you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in the acid book, really, I like stuck with like Hoffman's like interpretations. Like, I basically like Hoffman wrote only like a paragraph about what like he experienced and what he saw, but I tried to like stick with that. Like, it was a real anxiety attack for him because he didn't know what was happening to him. Meanwhile, the Wassons, like, they were in this whole
your mic is, you got to be really conscientious of your mic there.
Sorry,
so
okay.
Meanwhile, the Wassons, you're saying.
Meanwhile, the Wassons were in a completely like, different territory for them, and they've been looking for this for so long. I forget what I'm saying now. I had a point there, but I completely lost it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to stay still. What the heck? I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Wasson. Yeah.
You were talking about how when you were representing Hoffman's tale, he didn't really know what he was getting into, so it was anxiety, and you were trying to go directly from what he had written about it, which wasn't very much. But with the Wassons, they knew what they were getting into.
Yes, well, not 100% knew what they were getting into, but knew that they wanted to find like this experience. So in the Mycelium book, the first trip that they have, they went once, and this is the one with the guy with the one eye, Aurelio. I don't know, the first like trip that doesn't work, and they're not allowed to take the mushrooms the first time. Like our Gordon did eat some of them, and nothing happened. So they had this whole thing where they thought maybe it just doesn't actually work, but they were they were interested enough that all the things came true that the guy said. The son wasn't in Boston; he was in New York City, and he really was at their house, and he really was doing something weird, like joining the army, So, I mean, for the Wassons, yeah, I mean, they just weren't stressed. It didn't seem like they were stressed out about it. They were more excited by the whole prospect because they've been looking for these things for so long, and it was like a culmination of years and years. I mean, they wanted to go to that part in the book where they have the woman and the reindeer's peeing. They wanted to go to Kamchatka in Russia and like try to see like these Siberian women like that supposedly did this, but it's historically, I think that they did, but it's just like it's a little bit in between. But either way, they couldn't go to Russia in that time period. Like, they just weren't allowed to. So that's why they set their sights on Mexico, because they really wanted to find like a culture that used mushrooms in this way.
Mm-hmm. Was it an intentional decision to have so much focus on Valentina's role in the story? Because I know for myself, having a reasonable understanding of the sort of the Wasson mushroom discovery and debacle as it played out over time with regards to how Maria Sabina was treated by the villagers and how it impacted the village and the lives of the people there. That's what I mean by debacle.
Yeah, 100%.
But even in that, there isn't really a whole lot of that I encountered talk or discussion about Valentina's role in sort of that whole process coming along, except like, yeah, she inspired him and that was about it. But it seemed like you put quite a bit of effort into sort of really representing her as being an important part of this process. Was that an intentional decision, or was it something like, oh, I should because it's obvious, or were you like, no, I really want to make sure that she's featured?
No, I really wanted to feature. I mean, the trick of this thing, and something I've noticed throughout all of these, these psychedelic pioneers things, is it really is like about couples. Like Hoffman, during his panic attack, he called his neighbor, or his assistant, actually, Susie, called his wife and was like, "You have to come back here. Albert's having a panic attack." And his wife came back from visiting with her parents to care for him, and that was a major part in Hoffman's trip, in Hoffman's story. Same way with, our Gordon and Valentina. Like, I really feel like they were a couple together in on this. And this was a weird, I still don't completely understand like where this obsession came from for them. But it was a group obsession. It was something they did together. And that's what led to all of this. Like, the fact that both these psychedelic stories involve the love of two people. I think that's something that's pretty interesting that I hadn't seen anyone like focus on before, or yet. And I mean, maybe this is a weird way to do it, but hey, that's my 2 cents. This is what I got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like it might be fair to say that, sort of a implicit sexism has likely resulted in a strong prioritization of the man's role in the historical representation of the representation of the history. Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, the other thing is that she did die after very early on in the whole thing. Like, Gordon went on to write several books afterwards, so that probably adds to it. And I mean, their books too. After the Life magazine article, they really did Gordon especially really made an effort to make his books in limited quantities, only for mushroom researchers.
Mm-hmm.
Some think it's because of, the guilt of what happened with the Maria situation and everything else like that. And I mean, I kind of think that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. When you were researching I'm going to ask you about Bicycle Day as well, but particular to your new one about the Wassons. When you were researching, did you find any strange sort of historical bits that were a surprise to you, or even sort of contrary to sort of how there's a mainstream kind of general story that most people kind of have the assumption about. But when you were doing the research, did you find anything contrary to or surprising about these historical events?
See, with the Wassons, it's interesting because there is a subcategory of people that don't believe R. Gordon's take on the whole CIA debacle, and that's a thing that Masha and the photographer both really struck out against. So there is that. But as far as the historical record goes, I mean, what's interesting about these, their books are kind of written like forums would be pre-forum. It goes through and specifically lists, there's a whole chapter about mushrooms for murderers, where this couple wrote all these mystery writers that used mushrooms in their books and confronted them on hey, this mushroom wouldn't poison you. B, this mushroom would never grow next to this tree. C, this mushroom would never grow at this time, this time of year. It's all these kind of things. And then they would talk back and forth with these different mystery writers. That's kind of the level of work that they were at. So their book, especially the first book, Mushrooms, Russia, and History, it's just chock full of little tidbits like this. And I tried to put some of that in the book, going through, it was just highlight.
So tell me more about this CIA thing, because I have a sense of it, but maybe for the listeners, and maybe a point of clarification. You represented a particular sort of take on the CIA's involvement with Wasson and the Life magazine and the discovery of the mushrooms, the expose around the mushrooms. And you said that there was a different take and that the photographers spoke out about that. Can you flush that out a little bit more clearly for me?
Yeah. So, I mean, Masha is his daughter, and Masha's in the book. And basically later on in life, it was revealed. Here's kind of what happened: is they got $2,000 from this fund, the Geistschichter Fund, from this group in Delaware to like go on the first mushroom trip that they have with Maria. They got this grant, right? And the grant was kind of like no strings attached. They used it on the thing. And then later, so they went to Mexico multiple times, right? And this is like where things get confusing because we're talking about like several years in between. And like, you know, Valentina's death is like somewhere after like trip number 3 or 4. But I couldn't have this book be like, hey, they went to Mexico every summer. We're back in Mexico over and over again, you know? But there are a lot of interesting characters like Roger Heem, the guy who I talk about in the back matter of the book. He went with them on this other trip with this guy, James Moore, I believe is his name. And I wish I had a photo of him I could show you right now. Where the hell is it? Because I feel very confident about how I drew him as a dog and how I got his like likeness very good. If you look up like R. Gordon Wasson CIA on YouTube, it'll show this guy. He's got glasses. That guy ended up like going with them on their second trip to Maria with the rest of them. And that guy was a CIA agent and he worked with them he was a professor at a university in Delaware or at a group in Delaware or something like that. And he went with them, but he did not basically they took samples and Heem connected those samples to Albert Hoffman. And that's how Hoffman discovered psilocybin inside of these mushrooms. And this guy, the CIA agent, he didn't, he couldn't figure out what was inside of it. He couldn't isolate the psilocybin. So he kind of failed the thing. And also the cat was out of the bag. Like the Wassons, the main reason I kind of don't buy a lot of the extra stuff, but I mean, I don't know. There's so much stuff with this. And the guy has done a ton of research, but also the daughter has banned him from Wasson's archives.
Wait, who's this guy? Are you talking about Jan Irvin?
No. Shoot. I'm blanking on his name. I read his stuff. Yeah, you're right. God damn it. Why is this happening? When I'm on the spot here, you do this and then 6 months later it comes out and then you're like, oh, do you remember this guy's name? Yes, I do. I do know this guy's name.
But anyways, there's this particular guy who wrote a bunch about the CIA's involvement with the CIA's participation in Wasson's work. And his daughter, Wasson's daughter, is speaking out against the way the CIA's involvement is being represented by this writer that you can't remember the name of.
Exactly. She doesn't appreciate it and doesn't believe that.
So doesn't believe that the CIA were there at all, or doesn't believe?
No, she believes that they were there. This guy James Moore is definitely a CIA agent. Yeah. But whether or not R. Gordon knew that involvement and was okay with that is up for debate. Because, I mean, obviously, this was a cosmopolitan kind of thing and cross international borders for, R. Gordon. He was talking to people all over the world about these mushrooms. I don't think that him going, CIA route and them, bottle-nosing psilocybin or warehousing it somewhere would be what he would want out of this, Really, he was about, the research and about connecting with people about mushrooms. It's kind of like a trend in the 19th century. You see a lot of these guys have one particular interest, Younger collected beetles, all these different authors, they'll have a side interest of some thing. And I think this was an escape for the Wassons, but also just, it was an escape. It was a hobby, but it was also a way to give themselves they really appreciated and enjoyed talking to people about these mushrooms. And I think that gave them some sort of enjoyment to meet people and talk about this stuff. So I don't see why he would blow it all on a CIA connect, especially not for $2,000 when the trip cost a bit more than that,
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if this Moore character was showing up afterwards, then possibly there's more money being funded in. I mean, money can corrupt, and you don't think that something like that was going down?
Could have been, for sure. I mean, this book isn't the serious place to really
Sure, no, for sure. But you also did the research, so I'm curious, right? Especially when there is, I mean, not so much now, but for quite a while there was on the underside of the psychedelic discourse, there was quite a sort of hoopla about CIA. And their involvement in the psychedelic movement, a lot of it being run through by Jan Irvin, who very questionable character. I mean, especially James Kent, his sort of like last 10 episodes of Dose Nation, telling the story of Yervin's relationship with this like early mycologist person who got, I think, arrested for who was doing the work with Amanita muscaria Soma idea, and then ended up getting arrested for like child pornography or something like that. And there's like this, or he maybe killed himself. Anyways, there's like this weird involvement with Irving and all of that, and stealing research papers. And
Wasson wrote a book on Soma later. That was his last book. And that was a constant, like, Wasson was obsessed with Soma and was obsessed with it being a mushroom. And there's a funny quote somewhere. I can't remember which author he's talking to. But he's like, of course, Wasson needs it to be a mushroom. You know, Wasson, it doesn't have to be a mushroom. Everything doesn't have to be a mushroom. Because he'd already written, there's another book with Hoffman and Carl Puck about the Ecclesiastian mysteries. I'm sure you've seen
Eleusinian
that.
Mysteries.
Ecclesiastian is in the Bible.
Yeah.
Hey man, there's too much info out there. There's too much knowledge in the world.
I mean, there's some overlapping historical events between those two E-words. Yeah. So then did you come across and have to grapple with the narratives being put out by Euron Irvin while you're doing your research around Wasson?
Yeah, for sure. And there's one guy, I'm not sure if it's that guy or I'm just pronouncing his name terribly wrong in my head, but I just can't grasp his name. But there is one guy who's very specific on Wasson's involvement with the CIA. But I don't know. I mean, my book isn't really like the place for that. And, there's like other crimes at foot too, like there's other things that like happened like they didn't want to happen, or who knows how like went down. Like, I really just like tried to like present the information like the best I had it from the sources that I could like verify too. Because that's the other thing is like, you can't write a book and be like, you can write a book and be extremely critical, but not a book like this.
Yeah.
Like, that would be absolutely insane. Like nobody's asking me to blow the lid off of anything, but most people, like I'd had with Hoffman and Bicycle Day, I had people tell me that story entirely wrong for years, and then like I was like, you know what? Maybe one day I'll do it to where at least I'm adding to like the proper like sequence of events, to where it's not entirely like crazy.
Is that what you did with the Bicycle Day book that you try or?
Bicycle Day book is just 4 days, and it's just the first day he discovered it, right? He first synthesized it and then put it on the shelf. And then I think, I have it right here. I don't know how many years later, but several years later, he came back to it and he resynthesized it. And then it got ingested somehow, and nobody knows exactly how. I like to call that day Mysterious Ingestion Day. And he went home and he had like an experience on the couch. Then his wife and kids left because a town across the river in Germany basically got blown up and there was like fire coming down out of the sky, and all the Hoffmans came out at night and there was just like embers flying down. And they were like, all right, yeah, we're out. Like he sent the kids to her family's house in another town, Lucerne in Switzerland. And he went to work on Monday and did an ingestion, as was common in the time, just like the smallest amount that could have any effect. And then that's what happened.
Turns out
it's a panic attack.
Yeah.
So, as somebody who's like taken drugs before, somebody will tell you that story, but they won't tell it like that.
So then what was it that you hear when you're like, yeah, I often hear this story being told to me and it's like wrong. So what is it that you get told, and what is it that is the actual story?
Well, just what I told you is like the actual story.
Oh, right. Okay. So then what is it that you generally hear that your book tried to...
Just that he's just, people just are like, yeah, he was just tripping on his bike. He's always tripping on his bike. Just stuff like that, just like dumb, like, not like, not honoring the man and like how he's a serious chemist, and like people just, I think there is a certain type of person that just assumes that like all drug people are like Timothy Leary, when like in reality, like both this guy and the Wassons are actually like pretty serious people, like Valentina, pediatrician, like R. Gordon, like vice president of publicity at JP Morgan, which that's a whole other thing, is how much Gordon Wasson loved JP Morgan. I mean, I couldn't, there's a part in the book where he's looking at a picture of JP Morgan, but my man loved JP Morgan. He wrote a whole book about how JP Morgan wasn't wrong to sell rifles to the US in the Civil War at a profit, called the Hall Carbine Affair first, before he got into mushrooms. It's crazy. It's crazy. But these people are serious people. And I just think that usually gets lost, you know? I mean, even though, go ahead.
No. You go right ahead. This is about you.
I was going to go self-deprecating again and be like, even though I'm presenting it in a goofy way, but you know, I don't need to keep doing that.
But also, I mean, that isn't necessarily, you could mean goofy in the sense of self-deprecating, but you could mean goofy in a literal way, because I mean, you do draw them like dog people.
Gotta keep it. Yeah. Gotta keep it. Stay goofy, my friends.
So, do you have any plans to do another historical account? I don't know, what, like a cartoon biopic or on a particular event in psychedelic history or some other sort of event?
Actually, yeah, for sure. Because it kind of, after I did Bicycle Day, I did more research on like different figures within psychedelia. And it kind of blew my mind that 4 substances that are on the edge of getting legalized for like therapeutic reasons, or like that actually could have therapeutic value if, you know, doctors and scientists got to do like real research. Like they're starting to get to do it at Hopkins now, but like, you know, there's still like work to be done in that area. So, I mean, all 4 of those substances involve a couple in some way, which like, what is that? Like, how is two people's like relationship to each other related to these 4 compounds? Like, it's a little wild, you know?
So what are these 4 compounds? Obviously LSD, psilocybin, yes. I'm assuming MDMA. And
absolutely. You know the Shulgins then.
Yes, of course.
You know the Shulgins. You know there's another deep couple at play.
Well, I mean, the Shulgins, that's a story much more complex than just MDMA.
Well, see, that's the sex story, you know?
Yes. There you go.
But yes, of course, they have way more to offer than just MDMA. But, you know, I think ecstasy goes hand in hand with like their line of work, you know, in both Anne and Sasha's, like, you know, various interests.
So
I love to call and pick off.
What's the fourth substance then?
The third one I'm interested in is ketamine.
Right.
And I don't know if I should give that away just yet, because I haven't done all the research yet, and I don't know. This one's a couple on the rocks, so I don't know how it's going to work out.
Oh, fair enough.
A couple on the rocks.
I don't want to. I'm like, have so much curiosity, but I don't want to bust your creative bubble. I mean, my you could even cover your face so you don't give anything away. But my first sense of it is something about John C. Lilly, I would assume.
God damn.
Well, I mean, come on.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's easy. Yeah, a couple on the rocks.
So it's him and his love. It's him and a dolphin, right? No, I'm just kidding.
No. Maggie. See, there is a love story in there on the side. Maggie and the dolphin. Oof.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. There's a love story on the side.
There's another comic you could do that would be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we start. You know, I can't call it an experimental children's book if Maggie and the Dolphin is in play.
Sure, and for the listeners, Maggie and the Dolphin, if I am correct here, is the story of the woman who lived in a flooded out house trying to teach a dolphin how to speak English, but the dolphin was male and it used to get really frustrated, so she would just jerk the dolphin off, essentially, so that he would feel more relaxed so they could teach it to talk. And then that turned out to be quite a big...
Peter the dolphin was in love with Maggie. It was really like a whole thing. Yeah, so I didn't know how like much of a family show this was.
This is not a family show. This is
okay.
Yeah, don't worry.
I always assume psychedelic shows are, you know, just for kids, for everybody, but I know that's not right. I think that might be a particular thing to me, because it should be. It's for the whole family.
Yeah, there's another story I recently heard of a man who was having a sexual relationship with a female dolphin, I guess for like a few years or something, while working at the thing, and and that he spoke to it as being like a totally consensual relationship because the dolphin would approach him and ask for it, which is an interesting way to consider it given what we know about the intelligence of dolphins and their own sort of like social behaviors.
That's true. You know, I can't, I don't want to speak to that. I don't want to be on record. You know, personally, I don't know if I'm into that, but at the same time, I don't know.
I'm also not supporting this person's decision or affirming their opinion as correct, but it is interesting. It is interesting.
It is definitely interesting. Yeah, I used to do med studies at the MPRC in Maryland, and a couple of the older people that worked there, they all had like little tales about Lily, which is, you know, he's quite a character. A real doctor too. Like really, he came up with the gold standard of like electrocardiography. Like very wild, very wild. But I haven't done all the reading yet. I gotta build. These books aren't like major money makers, so I gotta build up some money to make another book. You know, and I'm in that phase right now. But when it's time, I'll do some research and. That might be it if it doesn't get too overblown and too bleak, you know. There might be something else that comes up. But yeah, I mean, yeah, so that's a subtle goal. Bring them in with just drug talk, and then, you know, show them that there's relationships with people that are affected through these compounds and what that means. And it's nice that this is a theme throughout it. Like love being a theme of psychedelics from the beginning. Like, come on, that's cheesy as hell, but for the love of God, how is that not something to talk about more? It's crazy. I know I'm preaching to a choir here, but you know, that's nuts, right? That's absolutely insane.
Yeah, it is. It is a beautiful way to weave in, especially in a context of, I mean, increasingly more so, but there's a very individualistically minded sort of lens through which psychedelics are understood right now or like discussed. It's about the individual healing and sort of like individual journey and how can I better myself and how can I heal my blah, blah, blah. I mean, increasingly it's recognizing like, oh, I mean, like the individual self is inseparable from their relational web and the quality of their relationships presently and throughout time, which are nested inside of larger social dynamics. And so you can't actually separate an individual's depression from their social circumstance, their familial history, and their sort of the larger sort of socio-political context in which they live and how they're positioned within that context based on their history as well as their sort of like where they fit inside of whatever demographic be they.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. I mean, no man is an island, you know, like you can't exist. I mean, you can't exist in the world totally by yourself, but I mean, is that what anybody wants to do? I mean, that seems to lead to its own mental problems, you know, just being completely cut off.
Sure. And even the people that do end up being completely cut off, in my mind, I'm thinking about like the forest person or the monastic or whatever, but even they are connecting with something beyond themselves, be it the very, very alive and very sort of animate other beings of the forest and the forest dwellers. As well as, you know, for a monastic might be something similar, but also, you know, the larger force of the universe moving through them, depending on the monastic tradition. I mean, some of them obviously like Catholic monasticism would obviously be with God the Father, right? Or say maybe something like what's the word?
You got three people there. You got a trinity. You know?
Sure, right? Or
Tom Hanks in a volleyball. You know, take it to a dumb example. He needed a friend so bad, he picked that volleyball up, cut his hand.
Wait, hold on, no spoilers. Don't spoil Castaway. It's one of the best.
If you haven't seen Castaway by now,
my partner hasn't seen it. I'm like, we should. Really? Have you ever seen it? Do you know much about it? She's like, no. And I'm like, we have to watch this, but we have to also have time for a 2.5-hour movie that's mostly silence.
It's very long. Very long. Well, I'm sorry. Hopefully your partner doesn't listen to this.
It's sad to say that she probably won't.
I mean, in my mind, that's a selling point. So there you go.
Great. Well, Brian, this has been a fun conversation. We'll bring it to a close here. Is there some links that you would like to direct people towards if they'd like to check out your art or get a copy of either Mycelium Wassoni, your new book about R. Gordon Wasson and Valentina, or your other book, Bicycle Day, about the discovery of LSD through Albert Hofmann?
Anthology editions. They have the books, and my website is myname.com. You're probably, since this is an audio format, you're not going to be able to figure it out, I'm sure.
So you spell it out, Brian. I can't even remember how to pronounce it now.
Did I spell it out?
Yeah.
You should spell it out now.
I'd have to refer to my notes.
Yeah, no, it's a horrible spelling pronounce. BRIANBLOMERTH.com.
Great. And you also have an Instagram and a Twitter, from what I understand.
Yeah, Pup's in trouble for some reason. I don't know. You pick out these Instagram names and then you're just stuck with them. I don't know why I did that. But Pup's in trouble for both, for some reason.
Great. Well, Brian, it was really fun talking with you today. I really enjoyed Mycelium Wassoni. Looking forward to checking out Bicycle Day. And also, I really love your art style. And I had a lot of fun on your Instagram just today, looking at some of the stuff that you got.
That's good. Look at that. Yeah. I'm glad you had fun. I'm just trying to present this information in a fun way, in a simple way. And hopefully, it changes maybe one person's mind about them being legalized for research purposes, I mean, that's its own other can of worms, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, and I hope that happens. So MAPS is great. Donate to MAPS. And all this stuff. I'm talking to people that know all this stuff. Nobody watching this doesn't know all this stuff. So yeah, I don't know. That's my 2 cents. I'm sticking with it.
Great. Well, thanks again for your time, Brian, and for the books.
Thank you. All right. I'll talk to you later.
And cut. Okay. So that was this episode of Adventures Through the Mind. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening all the way through to the end. If you like the show, please share it and spread it around with people that you know. Let them know that you enjoyed it. Let them know that you think that was a good episode, or share with them whatever your favorite episode is. If you'd like to support the show financially, you can donate to the show through PayPal, or you can become a patron on Patreon, which is like a monthly recurring couple of bucks, or you could buy something from the new shops. I've set up a couple new shops, which you can find. All of the links are in the description to this episode, wherever you're checking it out. And also follow the link to enter in the contest to win this beautiful piece of art that you're seeing here on the screen here on YouTube from Brian Blomerth. It's just gorgeous. So more information about that also in the show notes to this episode. So thanks so much, and I will see you on the next episode of Adventures Through the Mind. And until then, take care.